The bullet traveled 2,247 meters through swirling desert winds, past 3 mountain ridges, and into a target no larger than a coffee cup. Military experts later called it the most impossible shot in modern warfare history. The woman who pulled the trigger had been kicked out of sniper school just 18 months earlier for supposedly lacking the mental fortitude required for precision shooting. Her instructors said she'd never have what it takes. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they were. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Nevada sun blazed mercilessly over the Hawthorne Army Depot, turning the training grounds into a furnace that could break even the most determined soldiers. For 23-year-old Corporal Jessica "Jess" Martinez, the heat was nothing compared to the burning ambition that had driven her to this moment. She stood at the edge of the sniper qualification range, her regulation boots planted firmly in the sand, dark eyes scanning the distant targets that would determine her future. Jess had grown up in the mountains of Colorado, where her father, a former Marine Scout sniper, had taught her to hunt elk with a single shot from distances that made other hunters shake their heads in disbelief. By age 12, she could consistently hit a quarter-sized target from 800 yards using her father's weathered Remington 700. While her classmates were playing video games, she was learning to read wind patterns, calculate bullet drop, and control her breathing to the point where she could slow her heartbeat on command. Her childhood home was filled with the quiet discipline of a military family. Her father, Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez, had served 3 tours in Iraq before an IED took his left leg and ended his active duty career. He never spoke much about the war, but every evening after dinner, he would clean his rifle with the same methodical precision he'd once used to protect his fellow Marines. Watching him, young Jess understood that a rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was a sacred trust, a tool that required absolute respect and unwavering dedication. "Mija," he would tell her as they practiced together in the vast Colorado wilderness, "shooting isn't about pulling a trigger. It's about understanding yourself, your environment, and your purpose. The rifle is just the messenger. You are the message." Those words had echoed in her mind through every stage of her military journey. After graduating valedictorian from her high school class, Jess could have chosen any university in the country. Instead, she enlisted in the Army the day after her 18th birthday, driven by a desire to honor her father's legacy and push the boundaries of what was considered possible for women in combat roles. Basic training at Fort Benning had been a revelation. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands and mental pressure, Jess thrived. She scored perfect marks on every weapons qualification, finished first in her platoon on every conditioning test, and demonstrated a natural leadership ability that made even the most skeptical drill sergeants take notice. Her fellow soldiers began calling her crosshairs after she consistently outshot everyone on the range, including several male recruits who had been shooting since childhood. But it was during advanced individual training that Jess truly found her calling. The marksmanship instructors, seasoned veterans who had seen thousands of soldiers come and go, watched in amazement as she consistently grouped shots within a 2-inch circle at 600 yards. Her form was textbook perfect: prone position, stable as granite, breathing controlled and rhythmic, trigger pull smooth as silk. More importantly, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions, adjusting for wind and atmospheric pressure with an intuition that couldn't be taught. Sergeant First Class Michael Chen, the senior marksmanship instructor, had served as a sniper in Afghanistan and recognized talent when he saw it. After watching Jess systematically outperform soldiers with twice her experience, he pulled her aside for a conversation that would change her life. "Martinez," he said, his weathered face serious, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've maybe seen 3 or 4 shooters with your natural ability. You've got something special, something that can't be trained into a person. You need to apply for sniper school." The suggestion hit Jess like a lightning bolt. She had dreamed of following in her father's footsteps, but sniper school seemed like an impossible reach. The selection process was notoriously brutal, with a failure rate exceeding 80%. Even more daunting was the unspoken reality that in the Army's elite sniper community, women were still viewed with deep skepticism, if not outright hostility. But Sergeant Chen's encouragement planted a seed that quickly grew into an obsession. Jess began researching everything she could about the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. She studied the curriculum, memorized the requirements, and learned about the legendary instructors who had forged some of the world's deadliest marksmen. The more she learned, the more determined she became. She started preparing immediately, pushing her already exceptional skills to new levels. Every free moment was spent on the range, refining her technique and building the mental discipline required for long-range precision shooting. She studied advanced ballistics, memorized atmospheric tables, and practiced shooting in every conceivable weather condition. During weekend leaves, she would drive to remote locations in the Georgia wilderness, setting up targets at extreme distances and practicing the kind of shots that would be required in real combat situations. Her preparation went beyond the technical aspects of shooting. She knew that sniper school would test every aspect of her character, her physical endurance, mental toughness, and ability to function under extreme stress. She began running with a weighted pack every morning before dawn, often covering 15 miles through the humid Georgia countryside. She practiced holding shooting positions for hours at a time, building the muscular endurance needed to remain perfectly still in uncomfortable positions. Most importantly, she worked on developing the mental fortitude that separated true snipers from ordinary marksmen. She studied meditation techniques, learned to compartmentalize her emotions, and practiced making split-second decisions under pressure. She understood that being a sniper meant more than just being able to hit a target. It meant being able to make life-and-death decisions with absolute clarity and live with the consequences without hesitation. The application process itself was daunting. Beyond the standard military requirements, candidates needed recommendations from senior NCOs, psychological evaluations, and a track record of exceptional performance in high-stress situations. Jess's service record was spotless. Her fitness scores were among the highest in her unit, and her marksmanship ratings were simply unprecedented for someone of her rank and experience. When her application was finally submitted, Jess felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This was her chance to prove that gender was irrelevant when it came to precision shooting, that skill and dedication mattered more than outdated preconceptions. She had spent months preparing for this opportunity, and she was ready to show the world what she was capable of. The letter of acceptance arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Jess read it 3 times before reality sank in. She had been selected for the next sniper school class, one of only 30 candidates chosen from hundreds of applicants. As she held the letter in her trembling hands, she thought of her father, who had sacrificed so much in service to his country, and of all the women who had fought for the right to serve in combat roles. She was about to become part of an elite brotherhood that had never fully accepted sisters. But Jess Martinez wasn't interested in acceptance. She was interested in excellence. And she was about to discover that sometimes the greatest obstacles create the strongest foundations for unprecedented achievement. The gates of Fort Benning Sniper School loomed before Jess like the entrance to another world. Unlike the bustling energy of regular Army training facilities, this place possessed an almost cathedral-like quietness, broken only by the distant crack of precision rifles and the measured footsteps of instructors who moved with the controlled grace of apex predators. As she stepped off the transport vehicle with her gear bag slung over her shoulder, Jess felt the weight of 29 pairs of eyes scrutinizing her every movement. The other candidates were exactly what she had expected, elite soldiers drawn from across the military spectrum. Infantry veterans with multiple combat deployments, special forces operators whose faces bore the weathered marks of classified missions, and Marines whose reputation for marksmanship was legendary. They stood in loose clusters, sizing each other up with the careful assessment of competitors who understood that only a fraction of them would survive the coming weeks. At the center of this gathering stood a figure who commanded attention without saying a word. Chief Warrant Officer Bradley "Ice" Garrison was a living legend in the sniper community, a man whose confirmed kills in Iraq and Afghanistan had entered the realm of military folklore. He was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair that contrasted sharply with his youthful face, and pale green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings with mechanical precision. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had mastered the art of delivering death from impossible distances. "Welcome to hell," Garrison announced, as the candidates formed into ranks. "For the next 6 weeks, you will be pushed beyond every limit you thought you had. You will be sleep-deprived, underfed, and subjected to psychological pressure designed to break your spirit. 85% of you will fail. Most of you will quit. Some of you will be eliminated for safety violations. A very few will simply not have what it takes, no matter how hard they try." His gaze swept across the formation, lingering momentarily on Jess before continuing. "This course is not about political correctness or social experiments. It is about forging the most lethal precision shooters on the planet. If you are here for any reason other than an absolute commitment to excellence, you should leave now and save everyone the trouble." The first week was designed to separate the mentally weak from the physically incapable. The candidates were awakened at 0400 each morning for a punishing physical training regimen that would have challenged Olympic athletes. They ran obstacle courses while carrying 60-pound packs, low-crawled through mud pits filled with frigid water, and performed endless repetitions of exercises designed to build the specific muscle groups needed for long-range shooting. Jess excelled at every physical challenge, but she quickly realized that her biggest obstacle wasn't the training itself. It was the subtle but persistent hostility from both instructors and fellow candidates. During equipment inspections, her gear was scrutinized with a level of detail that bordered on harassment. While other candidates received constructive criticism, her mistakes were announced loudly enough for the entire class to hear. When she performed exceptionally well, which was often, the achievement was either ignored or attributed to luck. The worst treatment came from Staff Sergeant Vincent Kowalski, a former infantry sniper whose multiple tours in Iraq had left him with strong opinions about women in combat. Kowalski was Garrison's senior instructor, a man whose expertise was undeniable, but whose teaching methods seemed designed to crush rather than cultivate talent. He had made it clear from day one that he viewed Jess's presence as a dangerous distraction that would inevitably get people killed. "Martinez," he would bark during weapons drills, "your position is sloppy. In the field, that sloppiness gets Marines killed. Is that what you want, dead Marines?" When she corrected her position and executed the drill flawlessly, he would find something else to criticize. "Your breathing is irregular. A sniper who can't control her breath control won't last 5 minutes in combat." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The psychological pressure was relentless and clearly coordinated. During mealtimes, conversations would suddenly stop when she approached, leaving her to eat in isolation. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction during her turns on the range, forcing her to work with substandard gear while others enjoyed perfect conditions. Study materials would disappear from her barracks locker, forcing her to rely on hastily scribbled notes and borrowed textbooks. But Jess had been forged in the Colorado mountains by a father who understood adversity, and she refused to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her break. She adapted to every challenge with quiet determination, arriving earlier than required for every formation, staying later than necessary to perfect her skills, and maintaining a professional demeanor that revealed nothing of the frustration burning inside her. The marksmanship portion of the training began in the second week, and it was here that Jess truly began to shine. The course started with basic precision shooting from known distances under ideal conditions, gradually progressing to more challenging scenarios that simulated real combat situations. Students were required to engage targets at ranges extending from 300 to 1,200 meters, using a variety of rifles and ammunition types while accounting for wind, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. From the first day on the range, it became clear that Jess possessed skills that transcended normal training. While other candidates struggled to group their shots within acceptable parameters, she consistently placed rounds within the smallest scoring rings. Her fundamentals were so solid that instructors found themselves running out of technical corrections to make. Her ability to read environmental conditions was uncanny, often making wind calls that proved more accurate than the mechanical instruments used for verification. Private First Class Dylan Cooper, a young Marine sniper from North Carolina, was among the first to acknowledge her exceptional abilities. Cooper had initially joined the subtle campaign of ostracism against Jess, but watching her perform on the range had gradually changed his perspective. "Martinez," he said quietly after a particularly impressive shooting display, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father," she replied simply, not elaborating on the years of hunting in difficult mountain conditions or the countless hours spent perfecting her technique in the Colorado wilderness. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "Well, your father taught you right. I've never seen anyone read wind the way you do." It was a small breakthrough, but it marked the beginning of a gradual shift in how some of the candidates viewed her. As the training progressed and the pressure intensified, Jess's competence became impossible to ignore. During team exercises, her ability to spot targets and make accurate range estimations proved invaluable. Her calm demeanor under stress began to earn grudging respect from candidates who had initially written her off. The third week introduced advanced fieldcraft, the art of moving undetected through hostile territory, constructing concealed firing positions, and gathering intelligence while remaining invisible to the hunter-killer teams equipped with thermal imaging devices. These skills required a different kind of expertise, one that relied on patience, creativity, and an almost intuitive understanding of how to blend with the natural environment. Jess discovered that her smaller stature, which some had viewed as a disadvantage, actually provided significant benefits in concealment scenarios. She could fit into hide sites that would be impossible for larger candidates, and her naturally methodical approach to problem-solving proved ideal for the mental chess game of stalking exercises. During one particularly challenging exercise, candidates were required to move through wooded terrain to a designated firing position, engage a target at an unknown distance, and extract without being detected by hunter-killer teams equipped with thermal imaging devices. The exercise was designed to simulate the kind of deep reconnaissance missions that snipers might face in enemy territory. Jess spent nearly an hour selecting and preparing her hide site, carefully camouflaging her position and establishing multiple escape routes. When the time came to engage the target, a steel silhouette placed at 847 meters across a valley filled with swirling thermal currents, she took nearly 10 minutes to study the conditions before firing a single shot that struck dead center. Her extraction was equally flawless, moving so carefully through the underbrush that the hunter-killer teams never came close to detecting her presence. When she finally emerged at the designated rally point, she had completed the exercise in less time than any other candidate, while achieving the highest possible score. Chief Warrant Officer Garrison was waiting for her at the rally point, his expression unreadable. He studied her equipment and noted her clean uniform, which showed no signs of the rough crawling and scrambling that typically marked such exercises. "How did you move through that terrain without leaving any trace?" he asked, with genuine curiosity in his voice. "Small steps, careful placement, and patience," Jess replied. "My father taught me that the forest will hide you if you move like you belong there." Garrison nodded slowly. "Your shooting score was perfect. Range estimation was dead on. The time to target was exceptional." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. "That was textbook sniper fieldcraft, Martinez. Maybe the best I've seen in 5 years of running this course." It was the first unqualified praise she had received from any instructor, and it marked a turning point in her relationship with the training cadre. Even Staff Sergeant Kowalski began to moderate his criticism, though his fundamental opposition to her presence remained unchanged. As the fourth week began, the psychological pressure intensified dramatically. Candidates were subjected to mock interrogations, sensory deprivation exercises, and stress scenarios designed to test their mental resilience under extreme conditions. Sleep became a luxury, with training exercises extending through the night and emergency formations called at random hours. The academic requirements also escalated significantly. Students were expected to master complex ballistic calculations, memorize detailed information about enemy weapons and tactics, and demonstrate proficiency in advanced communication protocols. The volume of information was overwhelming, and many candidates began to show signs of breaking under the accumulated stress. Jess approached these challenges with the same methodical determination she brought to everything else. She developed elaborate memory systems for retaining technical information, practiced ballistic calculations until they became second nature, and maintained detailed notes on every aspect of the training. While other candidates struggled to keep up with the academic demands, she consistently scored at the top of every written examination. The combination of her technical proficiency and mental toughness began to earn recognition even from her harshest critics. During a particularly grueling night exercise that required candidates to engage multiple targets while being subjected to simulated artillery bombardment, Jess maintained perfect shooting form and hit every target, while several experienced soldiers missed due to stress-induced errors. But it was during the fifth week that everything changed. The training scenario was designed to be the ultimate test of sniper skills, a complex urban environment where candidates had to identify and engage high-value targets while avoiding civilian casualties and dealing with constantly changing tactical situations. Jess was assigned to a team with Cooper and another candidate tasked with providing overwatch for a simulated hostage rescue operation. The scenario required precise shooting in a confined urban environment with multiple levels, complex sightlines, and time-critical decision-making. The exercise began routinely enough, but quickly escalated into chaos when instructors introduced unexpected variables designed to test the candidate's ability to adapt under pressure. Mock civilians began moving through the target area. Friendly forces changed their approach routes without warning, and weather conditions shifted dramatically to create challenging shooting conditions. It was in this moment of maximum confusion that Jess demonstrated the qualities that would define her career. While other team members struggled to maintain situational awareness, she calmly processed the rapidly changing information, identified the critical targets, and delivered precision shots that neutralized threats while avoiding any simulated civilian casualties. Her performance was so flawless that Chief Warrant Officer Garrison later described it as the finest display of combat marksmanship he had witnessed in 15 years of instruction. But even as her technical skills reached new heights, Jess could sense that her greatest challenge was yet to come. The final week of sniper school was approaching, and with it, the comprehensive examination that would determine who graduated and who went home. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that her real enemy wasn't the training itself, but the institutional prejudice that viewed her success as a threat to established order. Staff Sergeant Kowalski had been watching her achievements with growing resentment, and she could see in his eyes that he was preparing to make one final attempt to end her military career. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test more than her shooting skills. It would test her character, her resilience, and her willingness to fight for her place in a world that was determined to exclude her. The final week of sniper school arrived with an atmosphere thick as Georgia humidity. 29 candidates had been whittled down to 16, and the survivors moved through the training facility with the hollow-eyed intensity of soldiers who had pushed themselves beyond normal human limits. Jess walked among them, her uniform still crisp despite the weeks of punishment, her dark eyes alert and focused even as exhaustion tugged at the edges of her consciousness. The comprehensive final examination was scheduled to take place over 3 days, testing every skill the candidates had learned during their time at the school. But first came something unexpected, a psychological evaluation that had never been part of the curriculum before. Chief Warrant Officer Garrison announced it during the Monday morning formation, his expression carefully neutral as he explained the new requirement. "This evaluation has been added at the request of senior command," Garrison said, his voice carrying an undertone that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the directive. Dr. Patricia Blackwood from the Army's Behavioral Science Division will be conducting individual interviews with each candidate. These sessions are mandatory and will be factored into your final assessment. The announcement sent ripples of unease through the formation. Dr. Blackwood was a civilian contractor with a reputation for psychological assessments that could end military careers with a few carefully worded recommendations. Her presence suggested that someone in the chain of command wanted additional justification for eliminating certain candidates, and Jess had a sinking feeling that she was the primary target. Dr. Blackwood was a severe woman in her early 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights of the interview room. She dressed in dark business suits that seemed designed to intimidate, and her approach to psychological assessment was more interrogation than evaluation. When Jess entered the small, windowless room for her session, she felt like she was walking into a trap. "Corporal Martinez," Dr. Blackwood began, consulting a thick file that seemed to contain far more information than any normal personnel record. "You've had quite an impressive run through this course. Top scores in marksmanship, exceptional performance in fieldcraft, exemplary leadership during team exercises. Yet several instructors have expressed concerns about your suitability for the sniper program." The statement hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Jess maintained her composure, but internally she was calculating angles and exit strategies just as she would during a combat situation. "What specific concerns, ma'am?" Jess asked, her voice steady and professional. Dr. Blackwood smiled, but it was the cold expression of a predator who had cornered her prey. "Staff Sergeant Kowalski has filed several reports questioning your psychological stability under extreme stress. He suggests that your calm demeanor might actually mask an inability to make difficult decisions when human lives are at stake. He's particularly concerned about what he calls your emotional detachment during combat scenarios." It was a masterful piece of bureaucratic warfare. Kowalski had taken Jess's greatest strength, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and twisted it into a psychological weakness. In the military's risk-averse culture, any suggestion of emotional instability was career poison, regardless of actual performance. "Ma'am, I believe my performance during training speaks for myself," Jess replied carefully. "I've successfully completed every exercise, often with the highest scores in the class. My decision-making under stress has been consistently sound." "But that's exactly the concern," Dr. Blackwood continued, flipping through her notes with theatrical precision. "Normal people show stress responses during high-pressure situations. You don't. That could indicate either exceptional training or a concerning lack of emotional range. Tell me, Corporal Martinez, when you look through a rifle scope at a human target, what do you feel?" The question was designed to trap her regardless of how she answered. Express any emotional response, and she could be labeled as psychologically unfit for combat. Claim to feel nothing, and she could be classified as having sociopathic tendencies. Jess had walked into an ambush more sophisticated than anything she had encountered in tactical training. "I feel the weight of responsibility, ma'am," she answered after a moment's consideration. "The responsibility to protect my fellow soldiers, to accomplish the mission, and to use deadly force only when absolutely necessary. Every shot I take is a decision I make with full awareness of its consequences." Dr. Blackwood made notes in her file, her pen scratching across the paper with the sound of a death sentence being written. Staff Sergeant Kowalski also noted that you seem to lack what he terms appropriate bonding with your fellow candidates. He describes you as isolated, unresponsive to unit cohesion efforts, and potentially unable to function as part of a team in combat situations. This accusation cut deeper than the others because it contained a grain of truth twisted into something malicious. Jess had indeed remained somewhat apart from her fellow candidates, but that was due to the hostility she had faced, not any inability to work with others. The isolation had been imposed on her, not chosen by her. "Ma'am, I believe my performance during team exercises demonstrates my ability to work effectively with others," Jess said, fighting to keep the anger out of her voice. "During the urban warfare scenario last week, my team achieved the highest score in the class, primarily due to our coordination and communication." "Yes, but Private Cooper has indicated that your leadership style is unusual. He describes you as unnaturally focused and suggests that your intensity makes other soldiers uncomfortable. In his opinion, your presence might actually reduce unit effectiveness in a real combat situation." The betrayal hit Jess like a physical blow. Cooper, who had seemed to respect her abilities and had begun treating her as an equal, had apparently provided testimony that could destroy her career. She realized that the interview statements had probably been taken out of context or misrepresented, but the damage was already done. The session continued for nearly 2 hours, with Dr. Blackwood systematically dissecting every aspect of Jess's personality, training performance, and psychological makeup. By the time it ended, Jess felt like she had been flayed alive. As she left the interview room, she understood that the fix was in. The evaluation was designed to provide academic cover for a predetermined decision to eliminate her from the program. That evening, as the candidates prepared for the first day of final examinations, word spread through the barracks that several evaluations had raised red flags. The psychological assessment had become a weapon of elimination, and everyone understood that technical performance might not be enough to guarantee graduation. Jess found herself alone in the equipment bay, methodically cleaning her rifle and trying to process the events of the day. The M24 sniper weapon system felt familiar and comforting in her hands, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. This rifle had been her constant companion through weeks of training, the tool through which she had demonstrated her exceptional abilities. Cooper approached her hesitantly, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious discomfort. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something." Jess looked up from her rifle, her dark eyes unreadable. "About your interview with Dr. Blackwood?" He winced at her directness. "How did you know?" "Because she quoted you during my session. Apparently, I make you uncomfortable with my unnatural intensity." Cooper's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "That's not what I said, not at all. She asked me about leadership styles, and I told her you were the most focused soldier I'd ever worked with. I meant it as a compliment, talking about how your concentration under pressure was incredible." She twisted everything around. "It doesn't matter what you meant," Jess replied, returning her attention to the rifle. "What matters is how it gets used. Look, I'm going to request another interview. I'll clarify what I actually said." "Don't." The word came out sharper than Jess intended. "You'll just make it worse for both of us. They've already decided what they want to hear." Cooper stood there for a moment, clearly struggling with guilt and frustration. "This isn't right, Martinez. You're the best shooter in the class. Hell, you're probably the best shooter they've had in years. This whole thing is political bullshit." "Maybe," Jess said, finally looking up at him, "but I'm still going to nail the final exam. Whatever happens after that is out of my hands." The first day of final examinations tested long-range marksmanship under various conditions. Candidates were required to engage targets at distances ranging from 600 to 1,000 meters, using different rifles and ammunition types while dealing with changing weather conditions and time constraints. It was the kind of shooting that separated true snipers from ordinary marksmen. Jess approached the firing line with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated throughout the course. She had studied the ballistic characteristics of every weapon system, memorized atmospheric tables, and practiced the mental calculations required for long-range shooting until they became instinctive. When she settled behind the scope of her assigned rifle, the world narrowed to the relationship between crosshairs and target. Her first shot, at a target 650 meters away in a mild crosswind, struck dead center. The second, at 780 meters with gusty conditions, hit within 2 inches of the bullseye. By the time she had completed the marksmanship portion of the exam, she had achieved a perfect score. something that occurred perhaps once every few years in the sniper school's history. But even as Jess celebrated this technical triumph, she could see Staff Sergeant Kowalski conferring quietly with Chief Warrant Officer Garrison. Their body language suggested serious concerns, and she realized that her exceptional performance might actually be working against her. In an environment where failure was expected and struggle was valued, her consistent excellence was being interpreted as somehow unnatural or suspicious. The second day of examinations focused on fieldcraft and tactical applications. Candidates were required to plan and execute a complex stalking exercise, moving undetected through several kilometers of varied terrain to reach a designated firing position. Once there, they had to gather intelligence, engage multiple targets, and extract without being compromised by opposing forces. The exercise began before dawn, with candidates receiving mission briefings that included detailed maps, target descriptions, and rules of engagement. Jess studied her assigned route carefully, identifying potential concealment sites, obstacle areas, and escape routes. The terrain was challenging, a mixture of open grassland, dense forest, and rocky outcroppings that offered both opportunities and dangers for a skilled infiltrator. She moved through the landscape like a ghost, using every piece of cover and concealment to mask her approach. Her smaller stature allowed her to take advantage of hiding spots that would have been impossible for larger candidates, and her patience served her well during the long periods of motionless observation required to avoid detection. When she finally reached her assigned firing position, a carefully camouflaged hide overlooking a simulated enemy compound, Jess had traveled nearly 5 kilometers without being spotted by any of the instructor observers positioned along the route. The hide itself was a masterpiece of field engineering, so well concealed that it was virtually invisible from more than 10 meters away. The intelligence-gathering phase required her to observe the target area for 2 hours, documenting enemy positions, movement patterns, and equipment. Using a combination of direct observation and careful sketching, she created a detailed picture of the simulated threat that exceeded the requirements of the exercise. When the time came to engage targets, Jess faced a complex scenario involving multiple silhouettes positioned at various ranges and priorities. The exercise required not just accurate shooting, but tactical decision-making about target selection and engagement sequence. She had to neutralize high-value targets while avoiding civilian decoys and accounting for the reactions of remaining enemies. Her shooting was flawless. 5 targets at ranges from 400 to 900 meters, all engaged in the correct sequence and all hit with precision that left no doubt about the lethality of her shots. Her extraction was equally professional, moving through predetermined routes that took her away from the target area without compromise. When the exercise concluded, Jess had achieved another perfect score. Combined with her marksmanship results from the previous day, she had demonstrated a level of competence that should have guaranteed not just graduation, but recognition as one of the finest students in the school's history. But that evening, as candidates gathered for what should have been a celebration of their achievements, Chief Warrant Officer Garrison called Jess aside for a private conversation. His expression was troubled, and she could see the conflict playing out behind his pale green eyes. "Martinez," he began, choosing his words carefully, "your performance during this course has been exceptional. From a purely technical standpoint, you're probably the most capable student I've taught in 15 years of instruction." The word "but" hung in the air between them, unspoken but clearly implied. "However," Garrison continued, "there are concerns about your psychological evaluation. Dr. Blackwood's report raises questions about your emotional stability and your ability to integrate effectively with conventional military units. Staff Sergeant Kowalski has also submitted a formal recommendation that you be eliminated from the program." Jess felt the walls closing in around her. Despite her perfect performance, despite proving her abilities beyond any reasonable doubt, the institutional machinery had found a way to disqualify her. The psychological evaluation provided the perfect cover, impossible to disprove and subjective enough to justify any predetermined conclusion. "Sir," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I believe my performance speaks to my capabilities. I've met or exceeded every standard, worked effectively with my fellow candidates, and demonstrated the skills necessary for success in the sniper program." Garrison nodded slowly. "I agree with that assessment, Martinez, which is why I'm giving you a choice. You can accept elimination from the program now with a recommendation for reassignment to a conventional infantry unit where your skills would still be valuable. Or you can face the final phase of examination tomorrow, knowing that the standards will be impossibly high and that failure will result in a negative evaluation that could follow you for the rest of your military career." It wasn't really a choice at all. It was an offer to fall on her sword quietly rather than face public humiliation. Jess understood the subtext. They wanted her gone, but they were offering her a way to leave with some dignity intact. She looked at Chief Warrant Officer Garrison, this man who had seen her exceptional abilities but was powerless to protect her from institutional prejudice. For a moment, she considered taking the offered escape route. She could transfer to a regular unit, serve her country with honor, and avoid the fight that would sure to destroy her career. But then she thought of her father, cleaning his rifle with ritual precision every evening, never complaining about the leg he had lost in service to his country. She thought of all the women who had fought for the right to serve in combat roles, facing discrimination and hostility with courage and determination. Most of all, she thought of the rifle in her hands and the perfect shots she had fired, proof that skill and dedication transcends any artificial barriers. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I'll take the final examination. Whatever the standards are, I'll meet them." Garrison studied her face for a long moment, perhaps seeing something there that reminded him why he had become a soldier in the first place. "Martinez," he said quietly, "if you're going to do this, you better be perfect, because they're going to throw everything they have at you, and perfect might not be enough." As Jess walked back to the barracks that night, she understood that the next day would determine not just her future, but the future of every woman who dared to dream of joining the military's most elite units. The final examination would be more than a test of her skills. It would be a battle for her very right to serve. The stage was set for a confrontation that would push her beyond every limit she had ever known, and she would face it alone, armed with nothing but a rifle and the unshakable belief that excellence could overcome any obstacle. Dawn broke over Fort Benning with an ominous crimson sky that seemed to mirror the blood-red tension coursing through the sniper school compound. Jess had barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible scenario for the final examination. She understood that this wasn't just about demonstrating competence, it was about surviving a gauntlet designed specifically to destroy her military career. At 0500, she was summoned to a briefing room she had never seen before, located in a secure section of the facility normally reserved for classified operations. The room was stark and windowless, dominated by a large topographical map of an area she didn't recognize. Chief Warrant Officer Garrison stood at attention beside the map, but his usual composed demeanor had been replaced by visible discomfort. Standing opposite him was Colonel James Rutherford, the commanding officer of the sniper school and a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary throughout the Army. Rutherford was in his late 50s, with iron-gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to dissect everything they focused on. His presence meant that this examination had attracted attention from the highest levels of command. "Corporal Martinez," Colonel Rutherford began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 decades in uniform, "your performance during this course has been notable. However, concerns have been raised about your suitability for operational deployment. This final examination has been specifically designed to address those concerns." Staff Sergeant Kowalski entered the room carrying a detailed mission folder, his face bearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed victory was finally within reach. Behind him came Dr. Blackwood, her presence confirming that this examination would involve psychological evaluation as well as technical performance. "The scenario is as follows," Colonel Rutherford continued, pointing to the map. Intelligence indicates that a high-value terrorist target is meeting with local insurgent leaders in a remote mountain village approximately 40 kilometers from here. Your mission is to infiltrate the area, confirm the target's identity, and eliminate him with a single shot. The village is populated with civilians, including women and children. Rules of engagement are strict. No collateral damage will be tolerated. Jess studied the map carefully, immediately recognizing the complexity of the assignment. The village was positioned in a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges, with limited approach routes and even fewer viable firing positions. The distances involved would require shots at the absolute limits of her weapon system's capabilities. The target will be present for exactly 30 minutes, Kowalski added with obvious satisfaction. Miss that window and the mission is a failure. Additionally, you'll be operating alone. No spotter, no communication support, no backup. This is a solo infiltration and elimination. Dr. Blackwood stepped forward, consulting her ever-present notepad. From a psychological standpoint, this exercise will test your ability to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure while maintaining emotional stability. You'll be monitored throughout the mission, and any signs of stress-induced behavior will be documented for final evaluation. The parameters of the test were becoming clear to Jess. They had designed a scenario that was borderline impossible from a technical standpoint while simultaneously subjecting her to psychological pressure that could be used to justify her elimination regardless of performance. It was a masterpiece of institutional sabotage. You have 2 hours to study the terrain, plan your approach, and prepare your equipment, Colonel Rutherford announced. The target window begins at 1400 hours. Transportation to the operational area departs at 1100 hours. Any questions? Jess had dozens of questions, but she understood that asking them would only provide ammunition for her critics. Instead, she simply nodded and accepted the mission folder, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether her military career survived or died. The mission planning phase required every skill she had developed during her years of training. The target area was a simulated village constructed in a remote section of Fort Benning's training grounds, complete with civilian role players and a complex scenario designed to mirror real-world conditions. The terrorist target would be portrayed by an instructor wearing distinctive clothing, but identifying him among the civilian population would require careful observation and patience. Studying the topographical data, Jess identified 3 potential firing positions that could provide line of sight to the village. The closest was at 800 meters, well within her capabilities, but offering limited concealment and poor escape routes. The most distant was at 1400 meters, nearly at the maximum effective range of her M24 rifle system, but providing excellent concealment and multiple exfiltration options. The middle option, positioned at 1150 meters on a rocky outcropping, offered the best compromise between range and tactical advantage. However, reaching that position would require a treacherous climb up exposed terrain where she could be easily spotted by opposing forces positioned as part of the exercise. Her equipment selection was critical. The M24 sniper weapon system was accurate and reliable, but at extreme ranges, environmental factors became exponentially more important. She would need to account for wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and even the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation. Any miscalculation could result in a miss that would end her career. Jess spent nearly an hour studying weather data and atmospheric conditions. The day was partly cloudy, with variable winds gusting up to 15 miles per hour, challenging but manageable conditions. Temperature was in the mid-70s with moderate humidity, factors that would affect bullet trajectory in predictable ways. Most importantly, she studied the target description and behavioral patterns. The terrorist would be distinguishable by a red head wrap and would appear in the village center at exactly 1400 hours for a 30-minute meeting with other role players. The challenge would be confirming positive identification while dealing with civilian movement and limited visibility. At 1100 hours, Jess was transported to the edge of the operational area in an unmarked military vehicle. The driver, a sergeant she didn't recognize, wished her luck with genuine sympathy in his voice. As she stepped out of the vehicle with her equipment, she realized that word of her situation had spread throughout the base. People were watching this examination with interest that went far beyond normal training exercises. The infiltration began immediately. Jess had chosen a route that would take her through dense forest before ascending to her selected firing position. The approach required nearly 2 hours of careful movement, using every piece of cover and concealment to avoid detection by the opposing forces scattered throughout the area. Her smaller stature once again proved advantageous as she moved through undergrowth that would have been impossible for larger soldiers to navigate quietly. She climbed slowly and methodically, testing each handhold and footstep to avoid creating noise or dislodging rocks that could give away her position. The rocky outcropping she had selected turned out to be even more challenging than the map had indicated. The final approach required a nearly vertical climb of about 20 feet, with her rifle and equipment adding weight that made every movement difficult. But when she finally reached the position and surveyed the valley below, she understood that the effort had been worthwhile. From her perch at 1,150 meters, she had a perfect view of the simulated village. The range was challenging but manageable, and the elevation provided enough advantage to see over most of the buildings and obstacles. More importantly, her position was so well concealed among the rocks that detection from below would be nearly impossible. She established her hide with meticulous care, arranging rocks and vegetation to create a shooting position that was invisible from any angle, except directly behind her. At 1350 hours, 10 minutes before the target window opened, Jess settled behind her rifle and began the final preparation sequence. She verified her range estimation using the mil-dot reticule in her scope, confirming that the village center was indeed 1,150 meters away. Wind conditions were stable at approximately 10 miles per hour from the northwest, a quartering crosswind that would require careful compensation. Using her ballistic data card and mental calculations, she determined that the shot would require 12 minutes of elevation adjustment and approximately 3 minutes of windage correction. The mathematics were complex, but her years of training had made such calculations almost instinctive. At exactly 1,400 hours, activity in the village began to increase. Role players portraying villagers moved through the streets, while others representing insurgent forces took positions around the meeting area. The scenario was remarkably realistic, with enough complexity to make target identification genuinely challenging. Through her scope, Jess observed the scene with the patience of a born hunter. She cataloged every person in view, noting clothing, movement patterns, and behavior. Several individuals wore head coverings that could potentially match the target description, but none displayed the distinctive red head wrap that would confirm positive identification. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. At 1410 hours, she had still not positively identified the target, and doubt began to creep into her mind. Had the timing changed? Was the target approaching from a different direction? Was this part of the psychological pressure designed to force her into making a hasty decision? At 1415 hours, a new figure emerged from a building on the far side of the village square. Even at 1,150 meters, the red head wrap was clearly visible through her scope. The target had arrived exactly as briefed, but from an unexpected direction that had initially placed him out of her line of sight. The figure moved with purpose toward the center of the village, where other role players were already positioned for the simulated meeting. Jess tracked him through her scope, noting his gait, posture, and the way he interacted with others. Everything matched the target description perfectly. But as she prepared to take the shot, a new complication arose. A group of role players portraying village children began playing in the street between her position and the target. Their movement was random and unpredictable, creating a dynamic obstacle that significantly increased the complexity of the shot. The target took his position in the village center, consulting with other role players in what appeared to be an animated discussion. Through her scope, Jess could see him clearly, but the children continued to move through her line of fire. Any shot taken while they were in the danger area could result in a simulated civilian casualty, an automatic failure of the exercise. The psychological pressure was enormous. She had a clear shot at the target, perfect atmospheric conditions, and ideal range estimation. But the civilian role players created a constantly changing tactical situation that required patience and precise timing. She realized that this was exactly the kind of decision-making under pressure that the examination was designed to test. At 14:22 hours, 8 minutes into the 30-minute window, the children finally moved away from the danger area. Jess had a clear shot at the target, who remained in position discussing something with his companions. The range was 1,150 meters. Wind compensation was 3 minutes left, and atmospheric conditions were stable. She controlled her breathing, finding the natural respiratory pause that would provide the steadiest shooting platform. Her heart rate slowed as she entered the focused state that had characterized her finest shooting performances. The world narrowed until only the target existed in her consciousness. Through the scope, she could see the target clearly. He was standing still, presenting a perfect profile shot that would ensure instantaneous incapacitation. Her crosshairs were perfectly aligned. All environmental factors had been accounted for, and her position was rock steady. But as her finger began to apply pressure to the trigger, another complication arose. Dr. Blackwood's voice suddenly crackled through a hidden radio speaker, breaking the silence of the hide position. "Corporal Martinez," the psychologist's voice said, clearly audible but obviously transmitted from the observation post, "you have been in position for 22 minutes. Your stress indicators suggest elevated anxiety levels. Do you feel confident in your ability to make this shot, or would you prefer to abort the mission?" The psychological warfare was blatant and obvious. Dr. Blackwood was attempting to break her concentration at the critical moment, using verbal pressure to induce the kind of stress response that could justify a negative evaluation. It was a violation of every principle of fair testing, but Jess understood that fairness had never been part of this equation. She ignored the voice completely, maintaining her focus on the target and continuing her shooting sequence. Her finger continued its steady pressure on the trigger, her breathing remained controlled, and her position stayed perfectly stable. The psychological pressure became just another environmental factor to be managed and overcome. At 14:24 hours, with perfect sight picture and ideal conditions, Jess squeezed the trigger. The M24 rifle fired with its characteristic sharp crack, sending a 7.62 millimeter bullet across 1,150 meters of Georgia countryside toward a target that represented the culmination of months of preparation and years of dreams. The bullet flight time at that range was approximately 1.4 seconds, an eternity for a sniper whose career hung in the balance. Through her scope, Jess watched the trace of the bullet as it arced across the valley, carrying with it all her hopes and the hopes of every woman who had ever been told she wasn't good enough for a man's job. When the bullet found its mark, striking the target's center mass with lethal precision, Jess felt a moment of profound satisfaction. She had made an extraordinarily difficult shot under maximum pressure, proving once again that her skills transcend any artificial barriers or institutional prejudice. But even as she began to pack her equipment for extraction, she knew that the shot itself might not be enough. The examination had been designed to find fault regardless of performance, and she understood that the real battle was just beginning. Her perfect shot had won this engagement, but the war for her military future was far from over. The extraction from the firing position took Jess nearly an hour, moving with the same careful precision that had characterized her infiltration. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated to avoid detection by the opposing forces still scattered throughout the training area. But as she made her way back to the designated pickup point, her mind was already racing ahead to the confrontation she knew was waiting. The ride back to the sniper school compound was conducted in absolute silence. The driver, a different sergeant from the morning transport, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror with an expression that mixed curiosity with sympathy. Word had clearly spread about the nature of her examination, and the entire base seemed to be holding its breath waiting for the results. At 16:30 hours, Jess was directed to report to Colonel Rutherford's office for immediate debriefing. The building that housed the command structure was older than the rest of the facility, constructed of red brick and designed with the institutional authority that characterized military architecture from the 1940s. As she climbed the stairs to the second floor, her boots echoing in the empty hallway, she felt like she was walking toward a tribunal that had already reached its verdict. The outer office was occupied by Master Sergeant Linda Hayes, a career administrative specialist whose knowledge of military regulations was encyclopedic. Hayes looked up from her computer screen as Jess approached, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes conveying a warning that something was seriously wrong. "Corporal Martinez," Hayes said quietly, "they're waiting for you in the conference room. Colonel Rutherford, Chief Warrant Officer Garrison, Staff Sergeant Kowalski, and Dr. Blackwood." She paused, then added in a voice barely above a whisper, "Good luck." The conference room was dominated by a large mahogany table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. The 4 members of the evaluation board sat on one side, with a single chair positioned opposite them like a defendant's dock. Colonel Rutherford occupied the center position, flanked by Garrison and Kowalski, while Dr. Blackwood sat slightly apart with her ever-present notebook open and ready. "Corporal Martinez," Colonel Rutherford began as she took her seat, "we have reviewed the video footage of your examination, analyzed the ballistic data, and confirmed the accuracy of your shot. From a purely technical standpoint, your performance was exemplary." The word "but" hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Jess maintained her military bearing, sitting at attention while internally preparing for the blow she knew was coming. "However," Dr. Blackwood interjected, consulting her notes with theatrical precision, "the psychological evaluation component of your examination revealed several concerning indicators. Your stress response patterns were highly irregular, suggesting either exceptional compartmentalization abilities or potentially pathological emotional detachment." Staff Sergeant Kowalski leaned forward, his face bearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed vindication was finally at hand. "Additionally, your radio discipline during the examination was problematic. When Dr. Blackwood attempted to establish communication, you completely ignored her transmission. In a real combat situation, that kind of communication breakdown could have catastrophic consequences." The accusation was so absurd that for a moment Jess was speechless. They were criticizing her for maintaining focus during the critical phase of her shot, describing her ability to ignore distractions as a character flaw rather than a professional strength. It was psychological warfare disguised as performance evaluation. "Sir," Jess said, addressing Colonel Rutherford directly, "with respect, maintaining concentration during a precision shot is fundamental sniper doctrine. Any distraction during the trigger squeeze phase could result in mission failure." "But you didn't acknowledge the transmission at all," Kowalski pressed. "You demonstrated a complete inability to multitask or adapt to changing communication requirements. That's not the kind of flexibility we need in operational snipers." Chief Warrant Officer Garrison had remained silent throughout the exchange, but Jess could see the conflict playing out behind his pale green eyes. He understood the technical excellence of her performance, but he was clearly under pressure from higher command to support the predetermined conclusion. Dr. Blackwood flipped to a new page in her notebook, her movements deliberate and calculated. "More concerning is your apparent lack of emotional response to the act of killing. When you fired that shot, your heart rate actually decreased rather than increased. Normal human beings experience significant stress when taking a life, even in a simulated environment. Your physiological response suggests a concerning disconnect from the moral weight of your actions." The psychological evaluation had been weaponized beyond anything Jess had imagined. They were literally criticizing her for being too calm, too focused, too professional in her approach to her duties. In their twisted logic, her greatest strengths had become evidence of psychological instability. "Ma'am," Jess replied, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I was trained to control my stress responses during critical operations. The ability to remain calm under pressure is considered a positive trait in military operations." Or it could indicate sociopathic tendencies, the inability to form appropriate emotional connections to your actions. Tell me, Corporal Martinez, when you pulled that trigger, did you feel anything at all? It was the same trap that had been set during the initial psychological evaluation, designed to destroy her regardless of how she answered. Express emotion, and she was psychologically unfit. Claim to feel nothing, and she was a sociopath. The game was rigged from the beginning. I felt the weight of responsibility, Jess answered carefully, the responsibility to complete my mission successfully and to demonstrate the competence required of a military sniper. Colonel Rutherford studied a document on the table, his expression grave. Corporal Martinez, based on the totality of your performance during this course, the evaluation board has reached a decision regarding your suitability for the sniper program. The moment of truth had arrived. Jess straightened in her chair, preparing herself for the verdict that would determine her military future. Around the table, the faces of her judges revealed nothing, but she could sense the satisfaction radiating from Kowalski and Dr. Blackwood. Your technical skills are undeniable, Colin Rutherford continued. Your marksmanship scores are among the highest in the history of this school. Your fieldcraft abilities are exceptional, and your tactical decision-making under pressure has been consistently sound. He paused, and in that silence, Jess could hear the sound of her dreams crashing down around her. However, the psychological evaluation has raised serious concerns about your emotional stability and your ability to integrate effectively with conventional military units. Dr. Blackwood's assessment suggests that your psychological profile is inconsistent with the requirements of operational sniper teams. The words hit her like physical blows. Despite perfect performance, despite proving her abilities beyond any reasonable doubt, the institutional machinery had found a way to eliminate her using subjective criteria that were impossible to challenge or disprove. Furthermore, Staff Sergeant Kowalski added with obvious satisfaction, your demonstrated inability to maintain communication discipline during critical operations raises questions about your suitability. Snipers must be able to adapt to changing tactical situations while maintaining constant communication with command elements. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic destruction. They had taken every aspect of her exceptional performance and twisted it into evidence of unfitness. Her calm under pressure became emotional detachment. Her focus during critical operations became communication failure. Her technical excellence became evidence of psychological abnormality. Chief Warrant Officer Garrison finally spoke, his voice heavy with reluctance. Corporal Martinez, it is the recommendation of this board that you be eliminated from the sniper program. Your records will reflect that you were removed due to psychological unsuitability rather than technical deficiency. The distinction was important. A technical failure could be overcome with additional training, but a psychological evaluation would follow her for the remainder of her military career. They weren't just ending her dream of becoming a sniper, they were ensuring that she would never have another opportunity to challenge their decision.
You will be reassigned to a conventional infantry unit, Colonel Rutherford announced. Your technical skills will be valuable in a standard marksman role. This decision is final and not subject to appeal. Jess sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Months of preparation, weeks of perfect performance, and a demonstration of skills that exceeded anything the school had seen in years, all destroyed by a psychological evaluation that was clearly designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. But as the initial shock wore off, another emotion began to take its place. Not the despair or broken spirit that her tormentors expected, but a cold, burning anger that settled in her chest like molten steel. They had cheated her, twisted the rules, and perverted the very concept of merit-based evaluation. But they hadn't broken her. "I understand the board's decision," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "With your permission, sir, I'd like to request my next assignment." Colonel Rutherford seemed surprised by her composure. Perhaps he had expected tears, protests, or the kind of emotional breakdown that would validate their psychological assessment. Instead, he was faced with a soldier who accepted their verdict with professional dignity while clearly planning her next move. Your assignment orders will be processed within 72 hours. You're dismissed, Corporal Martinez. As Jess stood and saluted, she caught Chief Warrant Officer Garrison's eye. For just a moment, she saw something there that looked like respect mixed with regret. He knew what had just happened was wrong, but he was powerless to change it within the constraints of military hierarchy and institutional politics. She turned and walked out of the conference room with her head held high, her back straight, and her fists clenched at her sides. Behind her, she could hear the quiet conversation of the evaluation board, probably discussing the paperwork required to process her elimination from the program. Master Sergeant Hayes looked up as Jess passed through the outer office, her expression sympathetic but cautious. Military administrative personnel learned early in their careers to avoid getting involved in controversial personnel decisions, but her eyes conveyed the message that she understood the injustice of what had just occurred. The walk back to the barracks felt like a death march. Word of the board's decision had somehow preceded her, and the few candidates and instructors she encountered along the way either avoided eye contact or offered awkward expressions of sympathy. The military rumor mill operated faster than official communications, and everyone on the base would know about her elimination within hours. Her gear was still laid out on her bunk exactly as she had left it that morning. Rifle cleaned and ready, equipment organized with military precision, and personal items arranged in the Spartan efficiency that characterized military living quarters. Looking at it all, she realized that this chapter of her life was ending, but her story was far from over. Private First Class Cooper was waiting for her in the barracks common area, his face bearing the expression of someone who had just witnessed an execution. Word of her elimination had clearly reached the remaining candidates, and the atmosphere in the building was heavy with tension and disbelief. "Martinez," he said quietly, "this is bullshit. Everyone knows it's bullshit." "It doesn't matter what everyone knows," she replied, beginning to pack her personal gear. "What matters is what's in the official records. Are you going to appeal? File a complaint? Something?" Jess paused in her packing, considering the question. She could spend years fighting through military bureaucracy, filing grievances that would be dismissed by the same institutional culture that had orchestrated her elimination. She could become a cause célèbre for women's rights in the military, spending her energy on legal battles rather than proving herself in the field. Or she could take a different path entirely. "No," she said finally, "I'm going to do my job. Wherever they send me, I'm going to be the best soldier I can be. And someday, when they need someone who can make an impossible shot, they're going to remember my name." Cooper stared at her for a moment, perhaps seeing something in her that reminded him of why she had impressed everyone with her shooting abilities. "You're not giving up." "I'm getting started," she replied, continuing to pack her gear with the same methodical precision that characterized everything she did. "They think they've ended something, but they've just forced me to find another way." As evening fell over Fort Benning, Jess completed her out-processing procedures and prepared to leave the sniper school behind. But she wasn't leaving as a defeated soldier whose dreams had been crushed. She was leaving as a warrior who had been forged in the fire of institutional prejudice and emerged stronger than before. The next morning, she would report to a new unit, begin a new chapter of her military career, and start the long process of proving that excellence could not be suppressed by bureaucracy or prejudice. Her elimination from sniper school wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. And somewhere, in a distant theater of operations, a situation was developing that would give her the opportunity to demonstrate exactly what the Army had thrown away. The impossible shot was still waiting to be fired. The C-130 transport aircraft descended through layers of dust and heat toward Forward Operating Base Phoenix, a remote outpost carved into the unforgiving landscape of eastern Syria. For Sergeant Jessica Martinez, she had been promoted despite her sniper school elimination. This was her first deployment to an active combat zone, 18 months after leaving Fort Benning with her dreams seemingly shattered but her resolve stronger than ever. The plane banked sharply to avoid potential ground fire, throwing its passengers against their restraints as the pilot executed the tactical approach that had become standard procedure in hostile territory. Through the small porthole window, Jess could see the sprawling desert landscape that would be her home for the next year, a moonscape of brown earth, rocky outcroppings, and scattered villages that had been contested territory for decades. Beside her sat the rest of Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, some of the Army's finest infantry soldiers who had accepted her integration with the professional courtesy that elite units reserved for proven warriors. Her reputation had preceded her to the Rangers, not as the woman who had been kicked out of sniper school, but as the soldier who had achieved perfect marksmanship scores that are still talked about in military circles.
Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, her squad leader, was a veteran of 4 combat deployments whose scarred hands and weathered face told the story of close-quarters battles from Afghanistan to Iraq. He had been skeptical of having a female designated marksman in his squad until he witnessed her performance during pre-deployment training at Fort Lewis. Martinez, he had told her, after watching her consistently hit targets at 800 meters while other soldiers struggled at half that distance, "I don't care if you're purple with green spots, you can shoot like that, you're welcome on my team." The Rangers had given her something the sniper school never had, acceptance based purely on performance. Here, gender was irrelevant. What mattered was competence, reliability, and the ability to deliver accurate fire when American lives hung in the balance. The modified M14 enhanced battle rifle she carried was a generation behind the equipment issued to official snipers, but in her hands, it had proven deadly accurate at ranges that challenged much more sophisticated weapons. As the C-130 touched down on the rough runway at FOB Phoenix, Jess felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that characterized the beginning of any deployment. This was what she had trained for, the opportunity to serve her country in combat, to protect fellow soldiers, and to prove that the institutional prejudice that had ended her sniper school career was both wrong and irrelevant. FOB Phoenix was a testament to American military engineering and determination. Constructed in the middle of hostile territory, it featured reinforced bunkers, multiple defensive positions, and sophisticated communications equipment that kept it connected to command structures hundreds of miles away. The base housed approximately 400 soldiers from various units, all focused on the mission of disrupting enemy operations in one of the most dangerous regions of the conflict. The commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, a West Point graduate whose tactical brilliance had earned her rapid promotion and the respect of even the most tradition-bound soldiers. Chen was one of the few senior officers who had publicly criticized the sniper school's evaluation procedures, arguing that artificial barriers reduced overall military effectiveness. "Sergeant Martinez," Colonel Chen said during Jess's initial briefing, "I've read your file, including the rather interesting psychological evaluation from Fort Benning. I want you to know that your assignment to this unit is based entirely on your demonstrated abilities. Here, we measure success by results, not by conformity to outdated institutional biases." The mission parameters at FOB Phoenix were complex and constantly evolving. The unit's primary objective was to disrupt enemy supply lines while gathering intelligence on insurgent leadership structure. This required a combination of aggressive patrolling, precision strikes, and the kind of long-range observation that made designated marksmen invaluable. Jess's first month in country was spent learning the rhythms of combat operations in a hostile environment. The desert heat was oppressive, regularly exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit during midday patrols. The terrain was treacherous, filled with hidden ravines, unstable rock formations, and countless positions where enemy fighters could establish ambush sites. But it was the human terrain that proved most challenging.
The local population was caught between competing factions, with loyalties shifting based on survival rather than ideology. Distinguishing between civilians and combatants required constant vigilance and split-second decision-making that could determine whether a patrol returned safely or suffered casualties. Her first kill came during the third week of deployment, during a routine patrol that turned deadly when insurgents opened fire from a compound 600 meters away. While her squad sought cover behind a low stone wall, Jess identified the muzzle flash from a heavy machine gun that was pinning them down. Her single shot, fired from a prone position while under direct fire, eliminated the threat and allowed her squad to maneuver safely out of the kill zone. "Clean shot, Martinez," Staff Sergeant Thompson had said afterward, his voice carrying the respect of a veteran who understood the difference between training and combat. Textbook designated marksman work. But Jess knew that her true test was still coming. The psychological evaluation from sniper school had questioned her ability to handle the emotional weight of taking human lives. Now, having crossed that threshold, she understood that her critics had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of military service. The weight was real, but it was balanced by the knowledge that her actions protect fellow soldiers and advance legitimate military objectives. The intelligence reports that filtered through Phobe Phoenix painted a picture of increasing enemy sophistication. A new insurgent leader, known only as the Engineer, had begun coordinating attacks across the region with a level of tactical awareness that suggested advanced military training. His operations were characterized by complex ambush sites, sophisticated improvised explosive devices, and communication security that made tracking him nearly impossible. The Engineer's signature was precision, attacks that maximized American casualties while minimizing insurgent exposure. Intelligence analysts believed he was a former military officer, possibly trained by foreign special forces, who had turned his expertise against coalition forces. Finding and eliminating him had become the highest priority for every unit in the sector. 3 months into her deployment, Jess had established herself as one of the most effective designated marksmen in the battalion. Her confirmed kill count stood at 12, all at ranges exceeding 500 meters, and her reputation for accuracy under pressure had spread throughout the base. More importantly, her squad had suffered 0 casualties during operations where she provided overwatch, a statistic that meant everything in a unit where soldiers' lives depended on mutual support. The relationship between Jess and her squad mates had evolved from professional acceptance to genuine brotherhood. Corporal Jake Morrison, a young soldier from Texas who served as her spotter, had developed an almost telepathic ability to read environmental conditions and provide the kind of support that made long-range shooting in combat conditions. "You know what I like about working with you, Martinez?" Morrison had asked during a quiet moment between patrols. "You don't take stupid chances. Some of these guys, they want to be heroes. You just want to do the job right." It was perhaps the highest compliment she could receive from a fellow soldier, recognition that her approach to combat was based on professionalism rather than ego, effectiveness rather than glory. The mission that would change everything began with fragmentary intelligence about a high-level meeting scheduled to take place in a remote village called Al-Rashid, approximately 30 kilometers from Phobe Phoenix. Intercepted communications suggested that the Engineer would be attending, along with several other regional commanders, to coordinate a major offensive against coalition forces. The intelligence was time-sensitive and came from a source whose reliability was questionable. Any operation based on such limited information would be high risk, but the potential payoff, eliminating the most dangerous insurgent leader in the region, made the gamble worthwhile. Lieutenant Colonel Chen assembled her senior staff to plan what would become known as Operation Desert Hawk. The concept was straightforward: a quick helicopter insertion of a reinforced platoon to establish overwatch positions around Al-Rashid, followed by a precision strike if the targets could be confirmed and engaged.
"The village is in a narrow valley with limited approach routes," Chen explained during the mission briefing. "Intelligence suggests the meeting will take place in a central compound that's heavily fortified and well-defended. We'll have one opportunity to identify and eliminate high-value targets before enemy reinforcements arrive." The tactical challenge was enormous. Al-Rashid was surrounded by high ground that provided excellent defensive positions for enemy forces. Any helicopter insertion would be vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire, and extraction under fire could prove impossible if the operation went wrong. More critically, the range from potential overwatch positions to the target compound was estimated at 1,800 to 2,200 meters, well beyond the effective range of standard infantry weapons and at the absolute limits of designated marksman capabilities. Success would require not just exceptional marksmanship, but perfect coordination between multiple elements operating in hostile territory. Staff Sergeant Thompson recommended Jess for the Overwatch team, arguing that her demonstrated ability to make long-range shots under pressure made her the best choice for what could be a mission-critical engagement. The recommendation was approved without debate. Her reputation had preceded any concerns about gender or institutional politics. The team composition reflected the mission's importance. Besides Jess and Morrison, the Overwatch element included Sergeant First Class David Park, an experienced forward observer who could coordinate artillery support, and Specialist Tommy Rodriguez, a communications expert who would maintain contact with command elements throughout the operation. Equipment selection was critical. Jess would carry her modified M14 EBR, but the extreme ranges involved pushed the weapon system to its absolute limits. Every round would need to be perfect. There would be no opportunity for ranging shots or trajectory adjustment. The night before the mission, Jess spent hours studying topographical maps, weather data, and satellite imagery of the target area. The village of Al-Rashid sat in a valley surrounded by rocky ridges that provided multiple potential firing positions. The challenge would be selecting a location that offered clear line of sight to the target compound while providing concealment and escape routes if the position was compromised. Morrison worked beside her, using his spotting scope to practice range estimation techniques on distant objects around FOB Phoenix. Their partnership had developed into one of the most effective sniper-spotter teams in the battalion, built on mutual trust and shared commitment to excellence. "Are you ready for this, Martinez?" Morrison asked as they completed their final equipment checks. "I've been ready since the day they kicked me out of sniper school," she replied, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that came from months of proving herself in combat. "Tomorrow, we're going to show them what they threw away." The pre-mission briefing took place at 0300 hours, with the Overwatch team receiving final intelligence updates and coordination procedures. The meeting in Al-Rashid was confirmed for 1000 hours, giving them a narrow window to insert, establish positions, and prepare for what could be the most challenging shot of Jess's military career. As the team moved toward the helicopter landing zone in the pre-dawn darkness, Jess felt the familiar calm that preceded combat operations. She had trained for this moment through years of preparation, months of combat experience, and the crucible of institutional rejection that had forged her into something stronger than her original dreams. The impossible shot they said she could never make was waiting somewhere in the mountains of Syria. But this time, there would be no evaluation board to twist her success into failure, no psychological assessment to question her fitness for duty. There would be only the target, the crosshairs, and the space between them where legends were born. The helicopter rotors were already spinning as the team approached the aircraft. In a few hours, Sergeant Jessica Martinez would have the opportunity to prove that excellence transcends every artificial barrier and that the Army's loss had been her squad's gain. The proving ground awaited, and she was ready to claim her place in military history. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter cut through the pre-dawn darkness over the Syrian desert, its rotors beating a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of Jess's heart. Through the aircraft's windows, she could see the first pale light of dawn beginning to outline the jagged mountain ridges that surrounded their target area. In 3 hours, she would either make the shot that validated her entire military career or fail in front of the same institutional system that had already written her off once. The flight to the insertion point took 45 minutes, following a route designed to avoid known anti-aircraft positions while approaching Al-Rashid from an unexpected direction.
Beside her, Morrison checked and rechecked his spotting equipment, while Park reviewed artillery coordinates on his tablet, and Rodriguez tested communication frequencies with base command. The helicopter pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Kane, was one of the few female aviators in the unit and had specifically requested the mission when she learned about its importance. Over the intercom, her voice was calm and professional as she provided updates on their approach. Overwatch team, we're 5 minutes from insertion. The weather station reports winds at 15 to 20 knots from the northwest, temperature climbing toward 95 degrees. Visibility is excellent, but thermal currents will be significant once the sun comes up. The insertion point was a rocky plateau approximately 2,000 meters from Al-Rashid, chosen for its elevation advantage and concealment opportunities. As the Black Hawk flared for landing, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris, Jess felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that marked the transition from planning to execution. The team moved quickly off the aircraft, shouldering their heavy packs and weapons, while the helicopter departed immediately to compromise their position. Within minutes, they were alone in the vast Syrian wilderness, with nothing but their skills and equipment standing between mission success and potential disaster. The approach to their Overwatch position required 2 hours of careful movement across terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and shred equipment. They climbed through a maze of loose rock and narrow passages, with Jess carrying her M14 EBR and 200 rounds of match-grade ammunition that had been hand-selected for consistency and accuracy. As they climbed higher, the view of Al-Rashid gradually improved. Through binoculars, they could see the village spread across the valley floor, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounding a central courtyard where intelligence suggested the meeting would take place. The distance was formidable. Morrison's laser rangefinder confirmed 2,247 meters from their selected firing position to the target compound.
Jesus Martinez, Morrison whispered as he studied the target through his spotting scope. That's nearly 1.5 miles. I've never seen anyone attempt a shot at that range with an M14. Neither have I, Jess replied, beginning to construct her firing position among the rocks. But the ballistics work. The rifle can deliver a bullet to that distance. Whether I can put it where it needs to go is another question. The hide construction took nearly an hour, with each team member contributing to create a position that was invisible from below while providing clear fields of fire toward the village. Jess arranged rocks and vegetation to create a stable shooting platform, while Morrison established his spotting position with clear visibility of both the target and the environmental conditions between their position and Al-Rashid. Park set up his observation post with radio equipment that could coordinate artillery strikes if the situation deteriorated, while Rodriguez established communication links with FOB Phoenix and the Quick Reaction Force standing by in case emergency extraction became necessary. At 900 hours, 1 hour before the scheduled meeting, activity in Al-Rashid began to increase. Through their scopes, the team observed vehicles arriving at the central compound, with armed guards taking positions around the perimeter. The security arrangements were sophisticated, suggesting that high-value targets were indeed present. Multiple vehicles, civilian and military pattern, Morrison reported quietly into his headset. Guard positions established at compound corners and rooftop level. This looks like the real deal. The morning sun was climbing higher, creating the thermal currents that would make an already impossible shot even more challenging. Heat shimmer began to rise from the valley floor, creating optical distortions that would affect bullet trajectory in unpredictable ways. Jess settled behind her rifle and began the mental calculations that would determine success or failure. The range of 2,247 meters required massive elevation adjustment, nearly 40 minutes of angle on her scope's adjustment knobs. The crosswind would push the bullets significantly off course, requiring a hold-off that amounted to aiming at a point several meters to the left of any actual target. But the most challenging factor was the extreme angle of the shot.
Firing downhill at such a steep angle would cause the bullet to impact higher than normal calculations predicted, requiring her to adjust for gravitational effects that became exponentially more important at extended ranges. "Wind is steady at 18 knots from our 10 o'clock," Morrison reported, studying the mirage patterns through his spotting scope. "Thermal activity is building in the valley. We're looking at some serious atmospheric disturbance if this goes much longer." At 9:45 hours, a convoy of 3 vehicles approached the compound from the north. The lead vehicle was a modified pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, followed by 2 SUVs with darkened windows. The security was tight, with guards establishing overlapping fields of fire around the arrival point. "High-value packages arriving," Park reported over the radio to FUB Phoenix. "Multiple vehicles, enhanced security. Request confirmation on engagement authority." The response came back within minutes, delivered in the clipped, professional tone of Lieutenant Colonel Chen. "Overwatch team, you are authorized to engage confirmed high-value targets. Positive identification required before engagement. Exercise extreme caution with civilian populations." Through her scope, Jess watched as figures emerged from the vehicles and moved toward the central building. The magnification was sufficient to observe general movement in clothing, but positive identification of specific individuals would require them to remain stationary long enough for detailed observation. At exactly 1000 hours, the meeting began. Through the windows of the central building, the team could observe approximately 8 individuals gathered around what appeared to be a large table or planning surface. The distance made facial recognition impossible, but body language and positioning suggested a formal military briefing. "I've got eyes on the meeting," Morrison whispered. 8 individuals, animated discussion, appear to be reviewing documents or maps. Can't confirm specific identities from this range. The thermal currents in the valley were becoming more pronounced as the morning sun heated the desert floor. Through her scope, she could see waves of distortion that would make accurate shooting increasingly difficult. The window of opportunity was closing as atmospheric conditions deteriorated. At 10:45 hours, a convoy of 3 vehicles approached the compound from the north. The lead vehicle was a modified pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, followed by 2 SUVs with darkened windows. The security was tight, with guards establishing overlapping fields of fire around the arrival point. At 09:45 hours, a convoy of 3 vehicles approached the compound from the north. The lead vehicle was a modified pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, followed by 2 SUVs with darkened windows. The security was tight, with guards establishing overlapping fields of fire around the arrival point. "High-value packages arriving," Park reported over the radio to FUB Phoenix. "Multiple vehicles, enhanced security. Request confirmation on engagement authority." The response came back within minutes, delivered in the clipped, professional tone of Lieutenant Colonel Chen. "Overwatch team, you are authorized to engage confirmed high-value targets. Positive identification required before engagement. Exercise extreme caution with civilian populations." Through her scope, Jess watched as figures emerged from the vehicles and moved toward the central building. The magnification was sufficient to observe general movement in clothing, but positive identification of specific individuals would require them to remain stationary long enough for detailed observation. At exactly 1000 hours, the meeting began. Through the windows of the central building, the team could observe approximately 8 individuals gathered around what appeared to be a large table or planning surface. The distance made facial recognition impossible, but body language and positioning suggested a formal military briefing. The thermal currents in the valley were becoming more pronounced as the morning sun heated the desert floor. Through her scope, she could see waves of distortion that would make accurate shooting increasingly difficult. The window of opportunity was closing as atmospheric conditions deteriorated. At 10:15 hours, one of the figures moved to a window facing their direction. Morrison's spotting scope was powerful enough to provide detailed observation, and what he saw made his breath catch. "Martinez," he whispered urgently,
I've got positive identification on target alpha. Distinctive facial scarring matches the photo from intelligence briefings. That's the engineer. The moment Jess had been preparing for had arrived. Through her scope, she could see the figure standing at the window, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing traditional robes, but carrying himself with the military bearing that intelligence reports had described. The range was 2,247 meters, the wind was gusting between 15 and 20 knots, and thermal distortion was creating optical challenges that pushed her equipment to its absolute limits. "Confirm target identification," she said quietly, her voice dropping into the calm, focused tone that had characterized her finest shooting performances. "Confirmed," replied. "Target Alpha, positive identification. You have a clear shot." Jess began her final shooting sequence, the culmination of years of training and months of combat experience. She checked her scope adjustments one final time, 38 minutes of angle for elevation, holding 4.5 mils left for wind compensation. The mathematics were perfect, but mathematics alone wouldn't account for the thermal currents, the extreme range, or the dozens of variables that could send her bullet wide of its mark. She controlled her breathing, finding the natural respiratory pause that would provide the steadiest shooting platform. Her heart rate slowed as she entered the focused state that separated true marksmen from ordinary soldiers. The world narrowed until only the target existed in her consciousness. Through the scope, she could see the engineer clearly now, studying documents while standing perfectly still in the window frame. It was the kind of shot that defines careers, the kind of moment that separated legends from footnotes in military history. But as her finger began to apply pressure to the trigger, a new complication emerged. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece with urgent information from Base Command. "Overwatch team, be advised. Intel intercept indicates potential civilian meeting in an adjacent building. Confirm no civilian casualties before engagement." The psychological pressure was enormous, but this time it came from legitimate operational concerns rather than institutional sabotage. Any civilian casualties would end her military career more completely than any evaluation board, but hesitation could allow the engineer to escape and continue his campaign against American forces. Through Morrison's spotting scope, they confirmed that the adjacent building showed no signs of civilian activity. The target was isolated, the shot was clear, and atmospheric conditions were beginning to deteriorate as thermal currents increased. "Clear to engage," Morrison whispered. "Perfect sight picture. No civilian factors. Take the shot, Martinez." At 10:23 hours, with perfect sight alignment and ideal environmental conditions, Jess squeezed the trigger. The M14 EBR fired with its characteristic sharp crack, sending a 7.62 mm bullet across 2,247 meters of Syrian desert toward a target that represented the culmination of every challenge she had faced since entering the military. The bullet flight time at that extreme range was nearly 3 seconds, an eternity for a sniper whose career hung in the balance. Through her scope, Jess watched the trace of the bullet as it arced across the valley, carrying with it the hopes of every soldier who had ever been told they weren't good enough for an elite assignment. When the bullet found its mark, striking the engineer's center mass with lethal precision, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The most dangerous insurgent leader in the region was eliminated instantly, and through their scopes, the team could see the confusion and panic that erupted in the compound below. "Target down," Morrison confirmed, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and professional satisfaction. "Perfect shot, Martinez. Clean kill at 2,247 meters." The intelligence value of the operation extended far beyond the elimination of a single target. The meeting that the engineer had been attending was disrupted completely, with documents scattered and other high-value targets exposed in the chaos that followed. Park coordinated artillery strikes on the compound, preventing enemy forces from regrouping while the Overwatch team prepared for extraction. But the most significant impact of the shot was felt thousands of miles away, in the offices and conference rooms where military careers were made and broken. Within hours, video footage of the shot had reached the highest levels of military command, along with ballistic analysis that confirmed what everyone who witnessed it already knew. It was one of the longest confirmed kills in military history, achieved under combat conditions by a soldier who had been deemed psychologically unfit for sniper duty. The extraction went smoothly, with Chief Warrant Officer Kane's helicopter retrieving the team without incident. As they flew back toward Fob Phoenix, Jess felt a profound sense of completion that went beyond mission success. She had proven, under the most demanding conditions possible, that excellence transcended every artificial barrier. The aftermath of Operation Desert Hawk reverberated through military channels for months. The elimination of the engineer disrupted insurgent operations throughout the region, leading to a significant reduction in attacks against coalition forces. More importantly for Jess, the shot had been witnessed, recorded, and verified by multiple sources that made institutional denial impossible. Within a week of returning to Fob Phoenix, she received a message that Staff Sergeant Kowalski had requested early retirement from the Army. Dr. Blackwood's contract with the military had been terminated following a review of her evaluation procedures. Even Colonel Rutherford faced questions about the sniper school's assessment standards. But the most meaningful recognition came from Chief Warrant Officer Garrison, who sent a personal message acknowledging that the sniper school had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He requested that Jess consider reapplying for sniper training with a guarantee that her previous evaluation would be expunged from all records. Standing on the observation deck at Fob Phoenix, watching the Syrian sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jess considered her options carefully. She could return to sniper school, claim the tab she had always wanted, and prove her point to everyone who had doubted her abilities. Instead, she chose a different path. She would remain with the Rangers, continuing to serve as a designated marksman in a unit that judged her solely on performance. She had already proven everything that needed proving with a single perfect shot across an impossible distance. The bullet casing from that shot, recovered from her firing position and presented to her by Morrison, sat on her bunk as a reminder that dreams delayed were not dreams denied. She had become something greater than a sniper. She had become a legend. Years later, when military historians wrote about the longest confirmed kills in combat history, Sergeant Jessica Martinez's shot at al-Rashid would occupy a permanent place in the record books. But for the soldiers who served with her, the real story wasn't about distance or precision. It was about a warrior who refused to let institutional prejudice define her limits, and who proved that excellence will always find a way to shine through. The impossible shot had been fired, the target had been eliminated, and the doubters had been silenced forever. In the unforgiving mountains of Syria, Sergeant Jessica Martinez had written her name in history with a single perfect bullet, proving that they should never have kicked her from sniper school in the first place. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.